I looked at this idea of nature versus nurture. How do we peel back our nurture so that we can get at what's actually natural to us? And does it go away? Is it corruptible? That started to be so interesting to me philosophically that it gave me a tremendous amount of hope.
Hey, what's up, y'all? It is me here, Michael Franti, and welcome to this week's edition of the Stay Human podcast. I am super excited for a number of reasons. First of all, because I love our incredible guest. I'll tell you all about her in a moment. And this is our first Stay Human podcast that's being presented by an incredible clothing company called Pact. If you've ever wanted to buy a t-shirt that was super stylish, looked amazing, felt great, and was ethically sourced from the seeds through the entire supply chain, you're going to want to learn more about Pact. And I'm going to be telling you about them in the weeks to come. And so let's just get started here. Throughout her extensive career, our guest today has sold over 30 million albums worldwide and has earned countless music award nominations and wins from the Grammys, the American Music Awards, the MTV Awards, the VH1 Awards, the Billboard Music Awards, the Country Music Awards, the Michael Franti Thinks She Freaking Rocks Award. She's got that like several years running. She's graced the cover of Time Magazine and Rolling Stone. She's performed on Saturday Night Live, at the Super Bowl, at the NBA Finals, for the Pope, and for the President of the United States. And she is one of the few singer-songwriters to top the chart in every genre that she's written in, including folk, pop, club, country, standards, children's, and even holiday music. We can't possibly begin to cover all of her personal and career highlights in this short introduction. So let's just dive into the conversation with singer, songwriter, poet, actress, two-time New York Times bestselling author, and mental health expert. I'm throwing that in, Jewel. What's up, Jewel? How you doing?
Good. I'm so glad to see you.
What does it feel like to just hear all those things about yourself? You've accomplished quite a lot in a few decades of doing this.
I can see why I burned my adrenal glands out. This sounds tiring. No wonder I'm tired.
No wonder you're tired. Man, it's awesome to be here today. And, you know, we've had a chance to spend some time together the last couple of years. And, you know, one of the things that I love about you is, to me, you embody what this show is about, which is about being your authentic self and being able to just hear the stories of who people are, but also to embrace other people for just being their self and their authentic self. And I feel like you embody that. And I just want to, I know you've talked about it and a lot of people have read about it probably, but I want to know, like, where did you come from? Like, where did this sense of being such an individual and being so empathetic towards others come from? Like, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Alaska. My family were pioneers. So they were settlers. They left Europe during the Second World War and wanted to form a utopian artistic colony. This is before cults, but it kind of sounds like,
I want to do that.
I do too. Sounds awesome. And so my grandmother, my grandfather moved up there, never, you know, having come from a city in Switzerland and Germany, and just lived off. There was no grid, right? There was no electricity. There were no roads yet in Alaska. It was just still a really wild territory. And so I was raised on that same homestead that my dad was raised on. And my family are just highly individual. They're highly creative. They're just big readers. Not all college educated, or hardly any, I think. My dad might be the only one, but avid readers and just crazy characters. Alaska is full of characters, like crazy characters up there.
So you grew up on this. Was it a whole community, or was it just like your family? Or was it like
the community wasn't able to make it? So my grandfather had this theory that that cities fail when it hits a certain population index. Okay. Yeah. So he was convinced that Europe was getting to this population mass tipping point that it would cause Europe to fail. And he felt so strongly about it. He talked about 30 or 40 philosophers, artists, painters, poets to all leave Europe. This is before Hitler was a problem. So he went up to Alaska to find land for everybody. And during that time, Hitler became a problem. And the entire climate in Europe did end up changing. Nobody could get visas except my grandmother. So she was the only person that could go up to join him. So it was just the two of them.
Yeah. And so what was an average day be like on your homestead that you guys grew up on?
There's a TV show about my family. I don't know that it's on air anymore. It might have just ended. But for 11 years, my dad and my brother and my uncle and my cousin had a TV show called Alaska, the Last Frontier, where it really documented how I was raised. So a homestead basically means you're living off the land for survival, not for commercial profit. So you're just hunting and gardening and canning. And the livestock you have, everything is just basically to live on. It's not to sell and become a beef producer or a whatever tomato producer or something like that. So it just meant you lived off the land. And so it was a lot of work. We didn't have running water. We had an outhouse. Just getting, water in the winter, getting water in the summer, getting water to our gardens, hauling that much water. We had 5 acres of potato patches. So you can imagine getting a 5-gallon bucket at a time from a creek, walking it over to the potato patch. It didn't go very far. It was a lot of water. So it's just a lot of work. Summer was prepping for a lot of winter. Winter was getting through a lot of winter, and then you'd start again. But it was also a great lifestyle I was raised with. Yeah.
And, being a family of like artist philosophers too, what kind of art, obviously you weren't like making Instagram posts at that point, like what kind of art was your family doing and what were you doing?
My whole family wrote, whether it was just poems or short stories. Everybody made gifts for each other, because there was no presents for the holidays. And so everybody's very crafty. They all sculpt either with an axe or a chisel, all just self-taught. They all paint. They all write music. They all play an instrument, multiple instruments, usually nothing formal, no formal education, but self-taught and very talented. I've always said I'm not the most talented one of my family.
Okay.
And great storytellers. Like they're all very, very charismatic storytellers.
And did you guys just do that at night? Was it like dinner table storytelling, or was it just happened like spontaneous? Or?
For my dad's generation, their mother had been an aspiring opera singer and a poetess. And so she was homeschooling. And so the arts were a huge part of just what they spent time doing during the day. And there was a fair amount of free time when they weren't working. For me, my dad was a professional musician. My grandmother, gave up her dreams of being a poet and a singer to raise kids in Alaska. And then my dad sort of picked up, I guess, where she left off, and he did formal shows in hotels for tourists. My mom and dad both did. And then when she got divorced, my dad and I became a duet. So I was singing with them at age 5 in the hotels, and then he and I became a bar act when I was 8. And that's how we made our living. I got paid. He always paid me for the job. We worked hard. We practiced hard. My dad was a real drill sergeant when it came to practicing and harmonies and being professional. And so I learned a ton from him.
Nice. One of my favorite films ever is the film Hannah. Have you seen Hannah? So it's about a girl who's raised by her father somewhere like in Alaska. And he's sort of like this ex-special ops guy, and he's like the world is after, some secret agent spy bad guys are after him. And he has to go there, and he's got to train his daughter to survive, because one day he knows these guys are going to find him. He's either going to be killed or they're going to try to kill her or something. And so he teaches his daughter all these skills, like how to speak many languages, how to do math, philosophy, teaches her all these things about the other world, the modern world, so that at some point when he knows that she's got to leave and get out of there and escape, that she's prepared. And she ends up being like this sort of like superhero, like karate fighter, weapons expert, and it's awesome movie. But I've always kind of like imagined that was you. And because I feel like you do have this great way of interpreting this other world that you live in now and that you tour in now, Was there any sort of intention like that with your father or your parents? Like, someday our little girl's going to go out into this other world, and like, how do we, give her the wings and the skills to survive in that world too? Was there any sort of intentionality in that way, or?
Think so. I think my grandfather was running an experiment to see what it was like to reverse, to go against civilization, I guess, and go back to the land. And what would that do? How would that benefit a human? My grandfather was really brilliant, spoke 8 languages, was incredibly bright, but also really abusive. I find that a lot of those early settlers had these incredibly strong, often really overbearing personalities. And so there was a lot of abuse in that family, in my dad's generation. And then when my dad took over, my mom left when I was 8, and my dad took over raising us, and he started trauma triggering, but he didn't know what that word was. He didn't know what trauma was. My dad's childhood was so bad that when he went to Vietnam, it was relaxing. I mean, that's crazy. His nervous system, he felt relaxed. Like he was like, what is this feeling in my body? Like, that's crazy. So he became abusive when I was 8, when he took over raising us. And I moved out by the time I was 15. And I had been raised to be incredibly self-sufficient. I knew how to hunt. I knew how to garden. I knew how to survive off the land. I was raised with 6 aunts. There was 8 children. My dad was part of 8, 2 boys and 6 girls. And so these women are highly capable women. They can do every single thing from building a home to shoeing a horse to anything that needs to be done. So I was raised in a pioneer state by pioneers, which are the original entrepreneur. They're the original, like, we'll figure it out people of America, really, of any, civilization, I guess. And so I was raised with this very, give me the ball, I'll figure it out. I'm expected to figure out hard problems. I'm expected to rely on myself. And so I think that was, I can't underline how important that skill was to have been taught, especially as a female, because as I came down to the States, I realized not many women are honestly taught to do very much. And so they have a deep insecurity and then a deep dependence on men or other structures to thrive. And luckily I wasn't raised that way. It just wasn't part of my upbringing. And so I think it's probably one of the reasons I moved out at 15. I was like, I could live in a cabin with somebody that's mean to me, or I could just go live in a cabin and pay rent. And I was like, I don't mind working. I'll just be in high school and I'll work a couple jobs and I'll pay for my groceries and I'll pay for my, whatever rent. And that kind of started me off. And I think that skill of I'll figure it out. I wouldn't be leveraged. I wouldn't let somebody be mean to me. I wouldn't let somebody be abusive to me. I was never afraid to go out on my own. And that skill in the music business is important because there was always so many men, and being in bars too, by the way, like learning to handle myself in a bar where men propositioned me. Like I remember when I was 8, a guy folded a dime in my hand and he put my fingers around it and he goes, call me when you're 16. You're going to be great to fuck when you're older. That kind of thing happened to me all the time just because I was in these rough areas. And so I learned to handle myself. I learned to never trade sexuality or even flirting. I always made sure I was trading on my mind, trading on my heart, and that I wanted to be taken seriously for those things. And if I wasn't, I was always willing to cut my losses. And that's actually how I ended up in my car. I wouldn't have sex with the boss in San Diego. Wouldn't give me my paycheck, got kicked out because I couldn't pay rent, started living in my car, and my car got stolen and I ended up homeless. But it was because of that streak in me that was like, I don't want to be leveraged. I'll go my own way. I'll figure something out, as painful as it is.
Yeah. What was the thing that ultimately led you to leave Alaska for the first time? Was it a desire to get away, or is it a desire to go to something?
To go to something. One of my jobs when I moved out was cleaning buildings, and a dance instructor came from out of state to do a 2-week workshop. So I was like, if I trade cleaning your studio, would you let me take this dance workshop for free? Turns out I was a terrible dancer, but he found that I was a singer, and he was a teacher at a private fine arts high school in Michigan. It was called Interlochen. It was a really famous, apparently, school. And so he helped me apply for a scholarship, and I got a partial scholarship, $5,000, but I still needed $10,000 to go to the school, which was a lot of money to raise by yourself at 15. And so that's when I did my first solo show. I hadn't written at all. I actually only ever really sung backup for my dad, and I'd maybe do 2 songs in a 5-hour set lead. So this sort of first solo show, I did all Cole Porter covers because I just loved Cole Porter because he wrote the lyrics and the music. He was one of the few Tin Pan Alleys that did both. And I guess there's a gay man in me dying to get out too. It's no big secret. So that was my first concert in my town, basically helped me raise the money to go to school. So I got to go to this really prestigious, very wealthy, rich kid school, basically. And I showed up with a huge hunting knife and almost got kicked out my first day because they were like, you can't walk on campus with huge knives. And I was like, what are you talking about? Why? Like just normal where I'm from.
I need this. So what were some of the other impressions? Like when you first arrived at that school, did you just feel, or what did you feel? What was it like when you got there?
Gosh, a real mix of things. Many things. One is I didn't have money for food or books. I thought that would have been included in tuition. So I was suddenly like, oh my God, I need a job. And this campus was really far away from a town. And I was like, how am I going to get a job off campus? And that was really stressful. I think the other thing was I didn't know that many rich people existed in the world. It's kind of weird, but I thought there was like 3 in the world maybe at the time. And everybody, I'm sure they weren't even wealthy, but to me, just everybody seemed so affluent and well off. They had clean clothing and new clothing. And I was a pretty rough character. I was like a feral animal with very rough clothes, knives. I showed up like a little wild animal up there. What else? Everybody was super talented, wildly talented kids. I was one of the most talented people in my little town. You go to a school like this, everybody's talented. And I loved that. I loved that it just would make you level up. You just would see what you were made of because you were around so many inspiring other talents. Lonely. It was isolating, to be the only kid kind of with a job, trying to kind of hide that I had a job. Real worries. I had real worries, trying to keep apartments to have rented back in Alaska, and a lot of adult worries that a lot of the kids didn't have. I started having panic attacks. I didn't know what they were, but they started when I went away to school. So it was a mix, it was just a lot going on.
When you're just describing being this kid who's, the most talented one in your town, and then you go to this other place and suddenly you're surrounded by all these amazing people. Did you feel at any point at that stage in your life like, God, maybe I chose the wrong thing? Like, these people are all way better than me, cooler than me, richer than me. Did you ever have those kinds of like doubt and
I was definitely, I was 16 by this time. So definitely an insecure 16-year-old girl, like any, 16-year-old girl would be. But other people's talent never made me feel scared or less than. It always inspired me for whatever reason. It really lit me up. It turned me on. I liked it. And I'm that way to this day. I want to, I don't know if compete's the right word, but I want to see the best. I want to be around the best. I want to see how I stack up, and I want to push myself to be better. And you can only do that when you're around better. So I really liked that. Personally, I thought that part was really fun.
Hey, Stay Human podcast listeners. One of the things that I love most about this podcast is that I get to talk to people who are out there changing the world every single day. And so naturally, the products I not only love to use myself, but that I also love getting to share with you are out there doing the same thing, making a positive impact on our planet and on humanity. Pact puts their emphasis on putting people and the planet first by sourcing organic cotton, partnering with fair trade factories, and using 81% less water to make their clothes. And the best part, the stuff they're making is comfortable too. It looks cool. You feel great wearing it, and you look good in it too. So join me in supporting a company whose leadership is out there doing their best to stay human by visiting wearpact.com. That's wearpact.com. And use my code, STAYHUMAN, all capital letters, for 20% off your first order. You're going to love it. I want to fast forward a little bit because I'm really curious about your work in mental health. And, I'm somebody who throughout my adult life have battled depression, anxiety, just deep feelings of insecurity. And I was given up for adoption as a kid. So I've always felt like I was this kid who was never wanted. Like there's always been like this story that I've had to unpeel and unpack over the years of my life of just the trauma of being given up as a kid and feeling like nobody wants me, and it's led me throughout my life to, to act out in different ways and to seek attention from people that aren't always in the healthiest ways. And now in the place that I'm at now, I look at my life and I go, man, there was periods when I was living in such a dark place and didn't even realize it. Like, it didn't even occur to me how teetering on the edge of checking out, frankly, that I was. And I know that this is really super important to you, and it's part of your work today. Is that so? Can you tell me a bit about why, first of all, mental health is important for you, and then the work you're doing?
Yeah. When I moved out at 15, I didn't do it glibly. I didn't think this is going to work out great. I did it very soberly, very, very aware of how dangerous it was for me. The odds of a 15-year-old girl moving out of an abusive home and doing well in life are pretty much non-existent. We don't have any good role models, I don't think. Not many. Yeah. Especially back then, there was no internet. So I just knew it was a scary situation. I knew what I was taking on was a very dangerous proposition.
Yeah.
I knew that staying in an abusive home was a dangerous proposition. And so that's a hard thing when you don't have a good option. It's not like you have a loving place to go or a safe place to go or a sure thing to go to. And so I wanted to succeed, which meant, what the heck does that word mean? And I had to sit down and go, what does winning look like at this? And so I did a lot of contemplation, and I really realized that as much as I had a physical inheritance, a body that had this genetic DNA print that might give me a predisposition towards diabetes, I had an emotional inheritance, and it was as passed on. It was as genetic, I guess, in a way, as, and it might give me a predisposition to addiction or abuse or abusive relationships. So I could look backwards in my family line, and it looked like a river of there was a larger emotional story being told that was bigger than each individual. It was a lot of abuse. It was a lot of trauma, even though that word did not exist as far as I'm aware of until very recently. And when I looked at my dad, my dad was highly abused, horribly abused. He did so much better than his dad, but he still became abusive. Like I said, so much better. I'm so thankful, but still abusive.
Yeah.
How could he not, and how could I not? That's what was really scary, was how do you move out at 15 with any hope that this is going to work out any differently for you? So I called it emotional English. I was raised speaking an emotional language. And if I didn't learn a new emotional language, I would speak the language I was raised with. And that was my dad, right? Unless you learn a new word, you're going to use an old word, because we have to communicate. We live in a world of action. We have to create actions every day. And unless you're taught a new action, you're going to do the old action, no matter how it hurts you. And that's what's so frustrating for kids of abuse that become abusive. They become perpetrators. The shame and the horror of it is so much more than they can bear, which is why then they'll start drinking more. It's a shitty cycle. So I had to feel like I had some kind of shot at 15 of feeling like I could learn a new emotional English, but there was nowhere to go. There was no way to learn a new emotional language. There was no school for it, which was mind-boggling to me. Still isn't, by the way. Therapy isn't really it either, honestly, at the level that I'd love to get this to. So I looked at this idea of nature versus nurture. And if my nurture was so bad, right, raised in abuse, would I ever get to know my nature? That's kind of what you're talking about. Is the trauma of being adopted and being unwanted so wounding that you'd get to know your nature as if you hadn't been adopted, as if you had been with a birth parent that wanted you and kept you? Heavy shit to think about. How do we peel back our nurture so that we can get at what's actually natural to us? And does it exist? Does it go away? Is it corruptible? That started to be so interesting to me philosophically that it gave me a tremendous amount of hope. So I had to learn how to bring a lot more awareness further up the food chain if I was going to create any kind of change in my life. And so that's where I started to focus, which came slowly over the years in different ways. I stumbled on the most significant parts probably when I was homeless, because I was stealing. And I knew I was going to end up in jail or dead as a homeless kid if I kept up doing what I was doing. And I wanted to try to stop stealing. And I remembered this quote by Buddha that said, happiness does not depend on who you are or what you have. It depends on what you think. And I was like, that reminds me of this whole, motivation. What am I thinking that's inspiring an action like stealing? Yeah. And then what effect is stealing giving me? It actually gave me a sense of elation, safety, comfort. Stealing was so great. Like, it felt so good. And it was so exciting. And that was a nice distraction from my panic, so it was like a really nice distraction mechanism. And so what I learned to do was I couldn't witness my thoughts in real time because I had so much disassociation. I didn't know what the word was, but I could tell I could not witness my thoughts in real time. And so I started watching my hands, because your hands are the servants of your thought. So if you want to know what you're thinking, watch what your hands are doing, because it's your thoughts slowed down into actions. So my huge life plan was don't steal the dress I was about to steal, and then write down everything my hands do for like 2 weeks. So at the end of the 2 weeks, I had a journal that was like, I couldn't stop stealing. So I just wrote down when I did. I was like, stole a banana, stole a ring, whatever it was, I'd write it down, shook a hand, wouldn't shake a hand, washed my hands, opened a door. I didn't know what I was looking for. At the end of the 2 weeks, I sit down and I look at all my data. And I realized, holy smokes, I have not had a panic attack in 2 weeks. What a weird side effect. I thought I was going to figure out the motivations I had no idea what I was looking for. The really strange side effect is I didn't have panic attacks. What I stumbled on was presence. I forced myself to be very present because I was being so present with my hands, watching what they were doing. Yeah. And so I stumbled on mindfulness. I stumbled on presence, and the difference, right, of not having a panic attack for 2 weeks was like a godsend. I was like, what in the heck did that? And that got me very, very curious. And I started then to be able to pick one thing at a time to work on, like stealing. An example, just for people wondering, is first you have to cultivate presence, right? Meditation is just being consciously present. It's a bicep curl for your brain to learn how to be consciously present for longer and longer periods of time. Meditation alone won't change your life. It'll just get you in a position to change your life. It's like if your body was a car, your brain isn't the driver, it's the steering wheel. But if the driver isn't there, your brain will go on autopilot and move your body around. So we're not what we think, right? Descartes, I think, therefore I am. I disagree. I'd say I perceive what I think, therefore I am. So you're the observer. You're not your brain. You're the observer of your brain. That's kind of interesting. If you can observe you're sad, you're something other than sad. You're the observer of sad. And so getting present is sort of like getting your car off of autopilot and getting it into neutral. Being in neutral won't change your life unless you plan to live in a cave and never leave. Getting present just, again, gets your car in neutral. Now you need to be taught skills of how to get into new gears. So you're not going in the old gears, going in the old places. So that's where I started to develop or cultivate the two phases, I call it. One is the bicep curl of developing, being able to be consciously present for longer and longer periods of time. Phase two is, now that I'm present, how am I going to change my life? And so I decided to do that through specific behavioral, attacks, I guess, like stealing. I want to quit stealing. That's a real problem for me. It was a huge pain point. It was going to get me in a lot of trouble. That was the first thing I wanted to tackle. So first I had to cultivate enough awareness, presence to realize I was stealing. Because a lot of times I just woke up after and I was like, oh shit, I did it again. Then I started to become present while I was stealing, but I couldn't get myself to stop. It was just I didn't know why. It was just too good. I couldn't stop. Stole it anyway. Then I started to notice and become aware of my prompt when I wanted to steal, the urge, but I couldn't stop it. I still did it, but I noticed it. The very last thing that comes is the ability to intervene. You have to I cultivated 6 months of awareness to get to the point where I could even notice the urge to steal. And then I had to replace it with something. So I was like, okay, I have an urge. I have to do something with this impulse. I chose to write instead of steal. So then it was willpower. Oof, I noticed the urge. It was like the most, like, it's like a drug. Instead of picking up the drug, I picked up a pen, and it didn't feel as good. And I thought that was so weird. I love writing. Why wouldn't writing feel as good as stealing? Like, what a strange thing. And it made me so curious. So again, with presence and cultivating awareness, I sat in my body and I was like, what does it feel like when I'm writing? When I stole, I'd go, what does it feel like? One was exciting, and it felt like every part of me was constricted and excited and like a rush. When I wrote, I felt really calm and relaxed and open, and I didn't like it as much. Basically, what happens is we become addicted to neurological and neurochemical states. My own dopamine and excitatory chemicals that were, elicited out of my system when I stole were the drugs I liked. I liked those ones. So I never drank in my entire life. I never did drugs my entire life, but I was a drug addict to my own neurochemistry that I could get in my own pharmacy by doing an action that gave them to me. And writing didn't give me the type of drug I liked. And so basically what I learned from that is there's only two basic states of being. There's dilated and contracted, and that's it. And every single thought, feeling, or action lead to one of those two states. And so if you can map out for a month, every time you notice you're calm, open, relaxed, powerful, you feel great, but just notice what you were thinking, feeling, or doing. And then for a month, the same for contracted. Notice when your body's tight. It might be excitement, which is actually a contracted state. It could be, jealousy, anger, greed, not sleeping, not exercising, all these thoughts, feelings, and actions that lead to a contracted state, grumpiness. And then basically at the end of the month, after that research, I had a map to my parasympathetic nervous system and my sympathetic nervous system. I didn't know those words at the time, but I knew I had a map to a calm, open state, which is your parasympathetic, relaxed nervous system, and a contracted state, which is your sympathetic fight or flight nervous system. And since you can't be in two states at once, I get so nerdy about this. I get so excited. But you can hack your way out of a contracted state by participating in something off of your dilated list. So getting enough sleep, connecting to a loved one, exercising, being in nature, thinking thoughts that are true, and relax you. Like, I never quit. I'll always figure it out. I won't quit. I won't give up. That's so true about me. That's just not a dumb affirmation. That's the kind of truth that makes my whole body relax. Cause I'm like, I can take that one to the bank. That's true about me. It's not a dumb affirmation, So I don't know how I got on that, but this is why I wrote Hands. It was about following my hands around, about not being a victim. It's why I wrote Who Will Save Your Soul. It's why I became so prolific, is because I was a prolific thief. I became a very prolific writer instead. And it's why I wanted to see if without therapy, because I did all this without therapy, not that I'm against therapy, I'm all for it. It's just not everybody has access. And that's unforgivable in our society, I believe. Everybody should have access to the tools that leads to happiness. If they weren't raised with those tools, they should have access to an education. It shouldn't cost us money. And so I wanted to see if these tools that worked for me could work for other people with really complex trauma backgrounds like myself. And it turns out you can. And so that's the Inspiring Children Foundation. We have one of the highest rates in the world of helping kids with suicidal ideation.
That's awesome. When I hear everything that you just described, I think of the ways that we look at wellness in the world right now, and so many times, like we're thumbing through Instagram, we see, like for me, I'll see a guy like, oh, he's got ripped abs. He must be like super well. And then, you realize like, that's all that guy does, and the rest of his life might be in a shambles and you don't know that, but for so many of us and now for kids who are growing up, in this era, they're presented with all these images of like what it means to be well, or what self-care it means is just to, get your nails done. It doesn't mean look at your sympathetic or parasympathetic, nervous system, And so as my question to you is, as a mother, like, how do you guide your child through all of this, in this crazy world, and to be able to have that self-awareness of being able to heal yourself, take care of yourself, go through challenging moments, and not be beaten down by them, but to be able to grow through them?
It's been a strange thing to have gone from so poor and rural to wealthy and urban in a few decades of my lifetime. So the way I'm raising my son is in a really different circumstance than how I was raised. Emotionally too, right? I'm obviously so much more emotionally stable. But the surroundings do matter. You know, it's why I don't live in LA. Not to say parents can't raise great kids in LA. I know they can. It's just so foreign to me. I used nature to heal. I used nature to learn how to work hard. I used nature to become tenacious and gritty and resilient. And so not having nature as a role model for my son has been really strange, because I've had to become really thoughtful and intentional about how do I create resilience in a kid that's in a city? How do I create resilience for a child that has affluence and a shit ton of privilege? Really hard things to solve for. You know, I think fame and money are two strikes against you as a parent. That's why I didn't feel like I could handle also LA. There would be like 3 strikes I didn't even know how to deal with. But it takes a lot of thoughtfulness, because we're parenting in an era of history where no parent has parented before. Parenting didn't change a ton for centuries, really. Long time. We're in a wild, new wild west, and we're dealing with things as parents. So we have to be kind of patient with ourselves. The good news is doing less is being proven scientifically to be better for your child. Less technology, less scheduling, less busyness. It goes against what culture's saying, you know, where we're basically teaching kids sign language in utero. It's like starts right away. But they're learning, and there's a lot of great books, like Simplicity Parenting is a great book. It's very scientifically based. It's about doing less is better neurologically for our children. And we're in a competition for awareness, right? Every product wants your attention, wants you to be distracted from yourself. So one of the best things we can do as parents is arm our children with the ability to understand the difference of when they feel present and when they feel distracted. Not because we're going to teach them one's better. I just want to teach my son to have awareness of what does it feel like when you're present and in your body? What does it feel like when you're not? Can you start to tell the difference in those two states? Can you start to get your body to move between them if you wanted to? Can you get your body to regulate, basically your nervous system, to self-regulate and come back in? And that means making our kids responsible for their feelings. You know, if a kid says, "You made me mad," and say, I see that you're angry right now. What would you like to do about it? Teaching them to be self-responsible. When my son gets really upset or really angry, giving them the skills to go, do you want to take 5 breaths? Do you want to take a walk around the block? You know, here's 5 skills. Which one of these 5 would you like to do right now? Like, everybody gets upset. What do you want to do with it? And those aren't, oddly, is taught now. But frankly, they're not taught to adults either. You know, these are all things I had to learn myself too.
You know, I want to ask you about the feeling of powerlessness that so many of us feel every day when we pick up our phones and we read the news of the day, you know. And then this last week, you know, we hear of all these different Supreme Court rulings that are dramatically affecting the lives of, you know, millions of women, millions of people in general. And you know, we go, well, gosh, if I would have just, you know, voted, or if I would have just, then it would have stacked up, and then eventually it would have led to this thing. But now, like, you know, not enough people did, and now there's all these changes. And what do? You know, like I'm just one amongst the millions, and how can I make a difference in this world? And that's something that I feel like as an artist. I feel like, how can I inspire and promote optimism, positivity, people working together, people to be holding on to their values of who they are as humans and who we are as a nation and as a planet. And also being able to hold space for others who feel differently and to be able to listen to them and find ways to work together. I'm constantly trying to figure that out. Like, how is the best way to communicate that? And how do I have effect on, you know, the big letter P things that are happening out in the world? Do you have any insight into that, of how to get through that sense of just like, I'm just one random person out here? Or is that okay?
It is. It's all, something just that all of us struggle with and are struggling with, obviously myself included. It's so hard for us to grasp the radical activism of healing.
Mm.
We are so quick to want to heal the world. We're so quick to want to point out other people's traumas or inequities or shortcomings. There's no shortage of any of those things. But what if the more we try to do that with other people, we're just using it as a distraction from healing our own wounds and our own trauma? I do think the most radical thing you can do is heal yourself, because you don't know the magic that's going to come from it. I'm probably actually a good example of it. Like I didn't think I'd ever be a musician. I didn't think I'd ever be a famous musician. And I certainly didn't think I'd have a youth foundation or make basically a good portion of my time. 80% of my time is talking about mental health. And I didn't go to school for it. I just wanted to figure out how to be happy. I did not want to die. I give myself chill bumps. I do not want to die and leave this planet without saying I have gotten to taste joy, true, genuine, abandoned joy in my life. The stubbornness in me that was like, no, I'm not going to check out until I figure out I get happiness too. It's my job. Nobody owes it to me. I owe it to me. What am I willing to do about my happiness? That stubbornness ended up leading to me helping hundreds of thousands of people. But it's not because it didn't start with that. It started with, I just want to heal. And then magic happens. That's where like God or the universe or whatever the hell, magic unfolds when you learn how to follow your heart and really do the right thing, as quiet as it is. Even like when I moved into my car, it was such a dire situation. Like, I'm not compromising myself, not having sex with that boss led to a disaster in my life. Like, being homeless was the scariest, worst, most humiliating. People looked at me like I was an animal. They gave dogs more kindness than they gave me. It was awful. How did I ever think anything good could come of it? That's not for you to know. Your job is just to heal. Like, your job is just to pick up. Your job is to say, am I doing what I know is right now? As powerless as that is, it leads to tremendous power. So I would definitely just focus and encourage everybody to focus. Are you happy? Because politicians don't legislate happiness. Whether there's red or blue in the office, they don't legislate happiness. That's my choice to give up my happiness. I can choose to learn how to be happy in each moment, no matter what, unless I want to give it up. But that's me. It's not anybody else taking it. But we don't really like that. You know, the self-responsibility of my happiness belongs to me is great. And it's also bad, because it's the good and the bad news. The buck stops with you. And then you start to see the magic, like you do in your life. You know, you start to see the magic of connection. You see the magic of compounding numbers when more and more people heal together and find a community. It's really it's a honor to be a part of something like that. You know, the other thing I wanted to say on that is that what we consume changes us. I've really realized that. So what you're consuming is changing you. We're in relationship to what we take into us, whether it's food, changing our bodies, or the news changing our thoughts and our hearts. So be really thoughtful about curating what you think. Are all those thoughts good for you? Do you want to consume all those thoughts you're having? They're not all true. Do you want to consume them? Do you want to find a different thought? Do you want to consume the news? Do you want to abstain from the news? It makes a huge difference. And I noticed that in my son's life too.
I've got one last question for you. And it's the question I ask everybody who comes on the show, which is, what does it mean to you to stay human? Like, what does it mean to be human, and how do you hold on to it?
I actually kind of have been thinking a lot about lately about the move from a village to an urban environment as a species. You know, as we left villages, as we left nature basically and became urbanized, I think we lost a big part of our humanness. I really believe nature holds a huge key of what it is to be human. I think she is our mother. I think that it's one of the best role models. Me without two parents, you know, I really learned to be human by watching nature. A naturalness, you know, to the cycles, a naturalness to the cycles in our bodies, to our thoughts, to nothing's permanent. You know, no matter how bad you're feeling, things are going to change. You know, you learn all that from nature if you're not going to learn it from your parent. And so I think that, you know, as we became more and more urbanized and then colonial, and then colonials that invaded America, and we were at an interesting time where we as tribal people, white people, looked at other tribal people that were still tribal, right? Now I was, let's say my ancestors were urbanized, European colonists. They were already detached from nature. They're coming to America where there's tribes that are still in touch with nature. Yeah. And we just dehumanized them, right? We were poo-pooing them. We thought they were savages. We thought the colonists were civilized, right? And the villagers were savages. What I think we did is we moved out of the heart. I know it sounds so corny, but I think as we became more urbanized, we became more intellectualized. We built an altar at the god of the intellect. And we believed intellect made you civilized. It made you human. So people that weren't educated were uncivilized and they were less than human. They were animals. So for many, centuries now, I think it's a very accepted idea that education makes you human. It separates us from the animals. Now I'm not so sure. I think that the ability to live life from your heart and that your mind is a servant of your heart, I think that makes us human. And I think we're starting to see it be proven by just the fact that we don't know what to do with pain anymore. We're a species that forgot what to do with feelings. Mm-hmm. Show me another species that's done that. I mean, that's a really weird one. I know animals get embarrassed. I have seen animals have certain feelings, not as complex as us, but I've seen animals get embarrassed for sure. But for humans especially, I think it's really important to learn what is the intelligence of the heart. Power, if you're in your heart, it has a definition. It's something that benefits me and my community. That's a heart-centered act of power. Something that benefits me and my community. A head-centered act of power is something that benefits me, period, right? It's not sustainable. It's something very broken. So for me, staying human means being heart-led, learning to take that journey. What do they say? The journey that's the shortest distance, but takes the longest time to go from the head to the heart. To have your mind serving your heart, to make heartful decisions. Capitalism isn't bad. I love capitalism. Capitalism without a consciousness is rough. That's where we're depleting things where they can't be sustainable. I don't think socialism is the answer, but I think having heart is. And I think that's what we need to be teaching our kids, especially as we move into AI. That's going to be replacing human workforce for intellect. We just got replaced by AI. Isn't that interesting? We used to hire for brawn, muscles. Then we started hiring for brain, right? CEOs and talent. And now what are we going to hire humans for? I think it's going to be heart. And that's why I think all education going forward actually has to be much more about heart intelligence, emotional intelligence, vision, and those types of things. If we're going to have a place at the table on the planet.
I hear you, and I completely agree with you. That difference between intellect and intuition and listening to that voice within is something that all of us have had to really ask those deep, deep, deep questions over the last couple of years of the pandemic. All of us have been forced in one way or another to say, how am I showing up for my life, my health, the health of my family, the health of the world, and what am I contributing, and what things am I ready to just let go of in order to be happy and in order to be in my heart. And so I just want to thank you for being an artist that's out there, that's doing that and has been doing that for, so many decades. You inspire so many people. And tell us, are you out on the road this summer, this fall? How can people come see you?
Yeah, I'm out on the road till August 8th. I have a new album out right now called Freewheelin Woman. I'll have a book coming out soon, but I don't have a title yet or anything for it. And yeah, I'm always on social media because I can do that from my home in the mountains. I like it.
Awesome. Well, we've been talking with Jewel today. It's been super inspiring, and thank you for sharing this time with all of us. And on behalf of Pact, which is an incredible brand, thank you for sponsoring this show and for all the work that you guys do to make the supply chain for our clothes be as beautiful as the clothes that you guys produce. So thank you for joining us on this week's edition of the Stay Human podcast with Jewel.
Thank you. And thanks for all the art you do. It's just beautiful how you're showing up. Big fan.
Thank you.